So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about space-age fashion. Space-age fashion was a relatively short-lived trend. Its earliest whispers in high fashion began in the late 1950s. It peaked about the mid-1960s, and innovative fashion had moved on by the early 70s. Despite its short lifespan, space-age fashion accomplished no less than codifying the aesthetics of the futuristic. Its impact is still felt today. Even though the spectacular fashion photography of the 1960s is clearly of that time, every person today can recognize a vision of the future in these nearly 60-year-old images. The space-age couturiers did not invent these futuristic aesthetics. They were already extant in the popular consciousness of the Western world by the 1950s, and their origins stretch back to at least the late 19th century. Western literature is rife with conceptions of the future and space technology. As Patricia mentioned this morning, Jules Verne wrote From the Earth to the Moon in 1865, followed by Around the Moon in 1870. Although Verne makes no mention of spacesuits or futuristic fashion, his explorers wear their everyday garments inside a projectile shot to the moon from an enormous cannon. He accurately predicts not only many of the logistics and conditions of space travel, but also that the United States would be a dominant force in space exploration and that it would capture the entire world's fascination. Two other visionary French writers, G. Lefeur and H.G. Graffy, wrote Extraordinary Adventures of a Russian Scientist in 1888. In the first volume, the characters again travel to the moon in earthly attire, although they also wore helmet-like breathing apparatuses that the authors called respirals. The illustrators of the characters show the odd juxtaposition of 19th century fashion with the futuristic breathing apparatus, which you can see on your left. And this is particularly striking on Selena, the scientist's daughter, who wears her gas mask while fully corseted in flowing skirts. In the second installation, when the characters travel to Venus, the authors introduce spacesuits made from, quote, elastic garment fabric such as rubber, in which the whole limbs and torso are tightly imprisoned. The cloth itself was supported by a network of metal springs of extreme delicacy and remarkable elasticity to resist the expansion of gases contained in living tissue travelers. The head was protected by a kind of helmet of selenium, egg-shaped and resembling the respirals. Science fiction increased in popularity during the 1920s and 30s, especially through the many comic books that focused on space. By the 1950s, movies set in outer space were common entertainment. These works exposed a cultural ambivalence about advancing technology that vacillated between excitement and fear. Cultural historian Emily Rosenberg wrote, in films, comics, and literature of the pre-Sputnik 1950s, space travel had provided an ideal venue for elaborating various utopian and dystopian visions of a technological future directed by techno-scientific and political elites. All of these images contributed to cultural constructs of the sartorial future of the space age. Movies and cartoons released after men had successfully traveled to space, such as The Jetsons, running from 1962 to 63, Star Trek, the original series, airing from 66 to 69, 2001: A Space Odyssey, released in 1968, and Barbarella, published as a cartoon in 1962 and released as a film in 1968, further explored the aesthetic role of metal, streamlined or geometric shapes, uniformity, and female body revelation in futuristic fashion, serving to reinforce these ideas in the public mind. These aesthetics were cemented and spurred by the milestones of the space age, which spanned from 1957, when the Soviets launched Sputnik, to about 1972, when the US sent the last Apollo mission to the moon. This was an optimistic time of unprecedented human achievement, but the space race was also a manifestation of Cold War brinksmanship that could have ended in atomic apocalypse. Most importantly, for our context today, this period, especially at its peak during the mid to late 1960s, was a revolutionary period in fashion. Space age style was one of many varied modes of fashion that found traction during the tumultuous 1960s. Only a handful of Parisian couturiers embraced the startling new fashions inspired by spacesuits, spaceships, and other ephemera of science fiction made real. The space age aesthetic in high fashion was at its strongest from 1964 to 69, when André Courrèges, Paco Rabanne, and Pierre Cardin created a dramatic break in French haute couture, one that embraced futuristic design inspired by the ebullient spirit of the space race, encompassing technology, new materials, and modernism. Their designs were the Parisian answer to the emergence of a worldwide and influential youth culture, a movement that was barely acknowledged by other French couturiers. Valerie Steele explains, quote, "In the 1960s, the French had no youth culture the way the English and the Americans did. No Beatles, no Rolling Stones. Confronted with London youthquake fashions, the French couture was frozen. Then Courrèges used the idea of futurism as a metaphor for youth. All of his moon girl outfits, silver trousers, etc., that was really pivotal." For Courrèges, Cardin, and Rabanne, space-age design was the future meeting the present. It represented the promise of technology, youth, and women's expanding freedoms at a time of social upheaval, struggle, and violence. Although these were the three designers most often associated with the space-age fashion, they were not alone in creating the style. Emmanuel Ungaro and Rudy Gernreich were both innovative within the genre, and many other designers riffed on the most extreme space-age designs, usually tamping down the outre accessories and styling to contribute to a space-age fashion aesthetic that was widely publicized by the fashion press. Balenciaga also played a large role in introducing the space-age aesthetic. He trained Courrèges and Ungaro, who each took elements of the master's signature style, welted seams, structural fabrics, volume standing away from the body, to build a space-age look. Michel Goma designed for Jean Patou for 10 years before becoming the ready-to-wear designer at Balenciaga. We featured his Patou gown in Expedition. It's easy to see the relationship to both Balenciaga and a space capsule in this design. Although space-age designs were highly directional, they effectively trickled down to the masses, either as watered-down versions of the originals or as lasting and powerful images in fashion magazines. These silver paper dresses are a great example of a mass-produced space-age style. André Courrèges was the most closely associated designer with the space-age aesthetic and was one of the most influential and innovative fashion designers of the 1960s. Upon his death, The Telegraph wrote that Courrèges' own, quote, "new look swept the world in 1964 almost as dramatically as had that of Dior in 47. But unlike Dior, whose clothes evoke the opulence of a bygone age, Courrèges' highly distinctive designs owed virtually nothing to tradition. Instead, they embraced the space age." Physically active from a young age, Courrèges admired women who were strong and vigorous. He approached modern fashion with a desire to liberate the female body. He rejected tight, body-manipulating undergarments and stripped his designs down to their architecture, removing surface decoration and ornamentation. Courrèges' space-age style is perfectly exemplified by William Klein's 1964 photograph for Vogue. The model wears a clean white tunic with welted seams and pockets, perfectly cut slim white trousers, and a matching space capsule hat, kid gloves, and flat boots. She blithely reclines on the floor, her fingers flashing the peace sign. As the caption attests, everything about this ensemble and the young woman wearing it, quote, "leaps into the future." The double welted seams, machine sewn to appear as hermetically airtight as a spacesuit, and Courrèges' use of structured, luminous, optical white fabrics convey what was popularly understood as a futuristic, technological look. The next year, Courrèges showed his models as space cowboys in sporty trouser suits trimmed in navy stripes, mini dresses with pastel plaid hip-length jackets, and skirts with built-in braces. Likewise inspired by menswear, Courrèges also gave his models the tough, easy look of men in undress, dressing them in white t-shirt tops with round necklines and tank tops with deep armholes. He continued to style his ensembles with white kid gloves, and in spring '65, his boots featured slit toes. He further accessorized with goggle-like sunglasses and squared-off cowboy hats. More than any other collection, the spring 1965 show, presented in his atelier with the models energetically dancing to jazz music, embraced the space age and America's leadership in the race to the moon. Courrèges' designs were met with mixed reviews. Some thought his ideas to be outlandish and unwearable, while others were elated at his vision of the woman of the future. Yet Courrèges' signature style, which he maintained and developed throughout his career, made a tremendous impact on fashion culture. Yves Saint Laurent, for example, said in 1966, quote, "Things have never been the same since Courrèges had his explosion. It was a necessary and healthy happening in the fashion world." He added, "I found it difficult to break away from traditional elegance, and Courrèges changed that." Pierre Cardin, a couturier famous for modernizing and diversifying his business, he may be better known today as a brand than as a designer, was also an early enthusiast of space-age design, not only in clothing, but also in furniture and architecture. Cardin's biographer, Jean-Pascal Hess, described the designer as deeply interested in the space age. Quote, he was a lunar Periot, obsessed with the cosmos, technology, lasers, and the progress of the space program. He designed satellite dresses, tubular forms in the shape of rockets, wheeled pants, kinetic dresses, and jackets with metal breast cones. Cardin's engagement with the space technology began in the late 1950s when he incorporated sleek, modern forms into his accessories designs. In 1966, he introduced his Cosmos line, echoing much of the feeling for bodily movement and functionality in clothing that Courrèges also embraced. Curator Valerie Mendez wrote of Cosmos, every member of the family was accommodated. The basic outfit was practical and unisex, consisting of a short tunic or pinafore over body-fitting jersey rib sweater and tights or trousers. A domed felt hat, echoing cosmonauts' helmets, completed a female Cosmos, and a peaked cap resembling NASA off-duty attire was worn by men. In fact, a Cardin Cosmo was functionally dressed for comfort and mobility, but the complete ensemble was far too adventurous for general consumption. However, the pinafore, without its space-like accessories, was copied by mass manufacturers and rushed into high-street shops. These ensembles brought the contemporary science fiction of living in space into reality. For example, the Jetsons were animated in similarly geometric dresses, jumpers, and pared-down separates in bright colors. Cardin's designs also bear resemblance to the costumes in the Star Trek series, especially in their uniform details and color blocking. Although not young himself, Cardin acknowledged the power of youth culture by specifically targeting his space-age designs to the young, stating, "What I try to do is create a style which is contemporary, modern. But I would like everyone to understand that is a style for young people and not middle-agers. At 44, I would never dream of dressing myself up as a cosmonaut." Cardin was not exclusive to the space-age aesthetic during the period from the mid-60s to the early 70s, but at the peak of his space-age period, he designed some of the style's most memorable and unconventional silhouettes. Cardin continued his career well past the space-age craze in fashion. By 1972, he had shifted towards softer drape styles. His later fashion designs occasionally resurrected futuristic aspects, but he also channeled his interest in futuristic forms and technology into environmental design. Cardin opened a dedicated studio in 1970 and designed space-age products that range from furniture to bicycles, alarm clocks, computers, and wallpaper. Paco Rabanne was not strictly a couturier during the space age, gaining admittance to the Chambre Syndicale in 1971. He first gained popularity during the mid-1960s with his colorful plastic accessories and space-age sunglasses and visors. His accessories work, especially his large, bright, geometric earrings, was by 1965 frequently being featured in the fashion press. His philosophy was to create fun, colorful accessories that would amuse in the short term, stating, "Young people don't wear jewels anymore. Get a gadget jewel very often, quickly change the color, the form. That's the new feeling of the young." In February 1966, Rabanne presented his first clothing collection, which he described as unwearable dresses made of contemporary materials. Vogue pronounced the showing of 12 slim, colorful sheaths of linked plastic discs a sensational collection of modern clothes, while Women's Wear Daily called it outer space dresses for a brave new world of fashion. Although other designers had experimented with plastic and metal, Rabanne used these materials to challenge the idea that clothing had to be cut from cloth. The result, while not completely unprecedented, was stunning. In December 1966, Richard Avedon shot Danielle Luna in a short Rabanne dress of aluminum rectangles decorated with round studs. Styled with thigh-high gladiator sandals, she stands as a fantastical superwoman of the future. Rabanne's impact was immediate. Curator Linda Camises wrote, "A year after the bomb dropped by André Courrèges onto the sleepy world of fashion, a second big bang occurred in the form of Paco Rabanne, rattling the blasé professionals of the fashion industry just as thoroughly, if not more so, than the first." Rabanne gained significant amounts of media attention in France and the United States. His designs were sold in his own Paris store and at Lord & Taylor. While Cardin and Courrèges drew from the giddy wonder and naivete of the space age, Rabanne's work probed a darker manifestation of the rapid pace of social change. He noted of his first collection, quote, "I wanted to place clothing in harmony with the times, so I decided to present a violent collection manifesto to show them all what fashion could be. The collection was an intellectual exercise in provocation, but the results were well within the lighthearted, if adventurously confrontational, fun of the space age." Although Rabanne's work was criticized as fashion extremity, The film Who Are You, Polly Magoo, released in October 1966, satirizes a designer who immobilizes his models in metal sheets. Fashion editor Polly Mellon recalled, quote, "The clothes themselves were at first quite heavy, but when you got them on, they were balanced in a very beautiful way, in a very engineered way. He was able to work metal on a woman's body where curves were needed." Rabanne created some of the longest-lasting fashionable impressions of the space age with his designs for the film Barbarella. He costumed Jane Fonda as a futuristic spaceship captain, and throughout the film, Barbarella is dressed and undressed as a futuristic sex symbol, an astronaut, a fighter, and a sexually liberated woman. Rabanne's costumes were bold statements of futuristic femininity in plastic and molded armor. Tight bodysuits, high boots, and chainmail capes. Everything was designed to reveal or emphasize Fonda's body, but also her individuality and her confidence. The film is deliberately camp, but it expressed a real urgency in women at the time. Rabanne stated, "In France during the 60s, we had a similar women's liberation movement as in America. At the same time, I was doing the costumes for the movie Barbarella. So it was a moment when women emerged to be warriors because they needed to affirm their desire of emancipation, freedom, and liberty. The armor was necessary." Although not directly referencing the space age in his fashion designs and rejecting the title of futurist, Rabanne created the most committed examples of futuristic fashion, pushing the limits of what could be clothing. Throughout his career, he continued to utilize novel materials for his fashion, even circling back to fabric, which was fresh to his design philosophy. Kamisas ascertains that because of his compulsion to innovate, especially during the late 1960s and early 70s, he was the only one in the business who could claim to be not a couturier, but the custodian of traditional values of haute couture. Courrèges, Cardin, Rabanne, and others used space age design as a vehicle towards a more logical and progressive lifestyle. The collective look they created has come to represent the futuristic, recognizable even decades later, in both fashion and science fiction costuming. The space age looks designed in the 1960s have consistently been referenced since that time, but the concept has also evolved. Hussein Chilean, for example, shares Rabanne's experimental focus on materials research, clearly seen in his Spring 2000 collection, for which he created an airplane dress from the same smooth, rigid material used to construct aircraft. The dress transformed by remote control, lifting its panels to create new silhouettes. Chilean's design is just one extraordinary example of the continuation of the space age couturier's emphasis on provocation, new silhouettes, and scientific inspiration into the 21st century.